input on the plan. So tonight, IBI will be presenting the Transportation Master Plan updates, and following the presentation, as Zach has identified, we'll be having a question and answer session to hopefully answer some of your questions, but also please feel free to submit any questions either via email or phone after the presentation as well. So with that, I will pass it over to Scott to get going on the presentation.
All right. Thank you, Tori. Welcome, everyone. Just like to reiterate, thank you for joining this evening and participating in the TMP Transportation Master Plan Open House number 2. Today we have a presentation of the recommendations of the TMP, and we're looking forward to hearing from the public, from yourselves, about any comments and feedback on the recommendations of the TMP. As we go through the presentation, for the most part, I would like to ask that you type your questions into the chat, and we will monitor those, and Zach will help manage the questions. Generally, we'd like to direct those towards the end because there's a lot of overlap in the presentation between different slides, so you may not get the full picture until the end. These slides have been posted on the website. I'm not sure, hopefully some of you have had the chance to look through them. It's the same material that we're presenting tonight, so nothing is different, but we are hoping to present that, to go through it, to help explain what the slides mean, and to walk through it and get live feedback from yourselves. If there's anything else, I think we should be able to jump right into it. So if it's okay, I'm going to turn off my camera and proceed with the presentation. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see the main screen. This is the first slide, and just to start things off, so again, our topic of tonight is the Transportation Master Plan. So this is Meaford's first Transportation Master Plan, and an important thing to note right at the beginning is that a master plan is considered a long-term strategic plan. So it's focusing on the policies, direction, and the bigger picture infrastructure that's being looked at for the transportation network. A transportation master plan doesn't typically get into like very specific local issues such as the maintenance of a particular road or turning movements, but I mean, we are happy to hear all feedback on everything transportation tonight. So I wanted to emphasize that it's a planning document, and we're actually looking for a 25-year horizon for this study. So how does the transportation network evolve over the next 25 years? Another key point from this slide is that the TMP considers all modes of travel: driving, cycling, and walking, and commercial vehicles, including trucks and agricultural equipment. We're looking at future mobility needs to support the economy and tourism, and how to manage the transportation infrastructure, how the municipality should manage roads and bridges. And so tonight we're looking forward to hearing your feedback on these recommendations of the TMP, and following that we'll be going forward to council with a draft document in the upcoming weeks and next month. Okay, so once again, I guess just as an introduction, so my name is Scott Johnston. I'm the IBI Group project manager. IBI Group was hired by Meaford to undertake the TMP. We've been working on this project for almost the last year, and this is our second consultation round, second and final, that we are presenting the recommendations, and that's what we'd like to go through today. Okay, so this slide is about the process of the TMP and where and how we're gathering feedback from the public. So last year we started with phase 1, study foundation, looking at existing conditions, issues, developing a vision and goals, and we went to the public to ask for input on all of the transportation issues, objectives, goals, what we thought, or what we wanted to hear, what the public wanted out of the transportation network. We had great feedback. We did a survey. We had 300 responses, so that's really positive. This is the phase 2 recommendations. That's where we are now. So we're presenting the recommendations and asking for your feedback on these recommendations. And following this, we will be preparing a draft TMP report that will go to council, and it will also be published as a draft for public review for 30 days. I'll go fairly quickly through some of these slides because there's quite a few recommendations that we want to focus on. So this is a slide that summarizes some of the comments that we heard in the first consultation event. Now, of course, everyone is aware that the consultation has changed in the last year. So this TMP has moved online due to COVID-19. And the first consultation was through the online materials and the survey. We received 300 responses. In general, a lot of the comments we heard were about safety, traffic operations, and walking and cycling. So active transportation is a term that we use that combines walking and cycling. And accessible transportation, I should mention. Some of these bullet points or bubbles just summarize some of the comments that we heard from the public. We heard that rural roads are in poor condition and should be prioritized for maintenance. We heard some issues about individual roads, such as Miller Street, safety concerns about Miller Street. We heard general comments about cycling facilities and signage, how that could improve and promote transportation. Some comments were about traffic operations, like difficulty turning onto Sykes Street. We heard quite a few requests about safety and speeding on streets, individual streets like Miller Street, Ridge, Pearson Street, Union Street, Aiken Street, and so on. And we heard some comments that more sidewalks are needed in the urban parts of Meaford. So following the first PIC, we refined our vision and goals. The vision and goals are important for a TMP because this is how it really drives the development of the TMP and the evaluation of alternatives. It's important to note that that these were revised following the first PIC based on the feedback we received. And as I mentioned, these goals are important because as we get into the recommendations of the projects, we want to make sure the recommendations capture these goals. And we'll explain what that means. So meeting the needs of residents and businesses, fiscally responsible, enhancing safety, accessibility, and equity, supporting active lifestyles, and supporting environmental sustainability. So those are the goals, and we can see how those reflected in the recommendations. In terms of needs and opportunities, so this slide, it helps us develop and frame, like combining the input we receive from the public and our assessment of what the needs and issues are. We sort of develop this slide as a problem statement, like what are the needs? So the first broad need or the first broad opportunity was to improve the road network to accommodate growth and better support the agricultural economy. Some points that come out of that or some needs are capacity or operations improvements, rural road upgrades and improvements. And there was some commentary about a need for better east-west connection south of the urban area, perhaps allowing trucks to bypass urban Meaford or better connections across the south. Another need we identified was addressing speeding and safety concerns. That includes items like traffic calming and intersection safety. Supporting active transportation. So an important part of this TMP is active transportation, walking and cycling. So you'll see as we get into the recommendations that we've developed a plan to address these types of needs: sidewalk needs, safer mid-block pedestrian crossings, expanding the cycling network. And finally, a need to improve maintenance and asset management. So improve maintenance policies, priorities, specifically related to roads and bridges. Okay. This slide is a fairly busy slide, probably won't be able to read it in detail, but it's an important part of the TMP process. So what it is that as we look at the goals and objectives and vision, we wanted to look at different scenarios, different ways that Meaford could meet those goals and vision. And they represent different levels of investment and different focuses. So alternative one, maintaining the existing infrastructure. This is a scenario where Meaford would take a minimum cost approach, really just focusing on meeting minimum maintenance standards for roads and not really investing in others. And you can see from the evaluation, well, that scores quite well on the fiscally responsible side, but it scores lower on the other criteria. The next alternative was to focus on the road network, so growing and expanding the roads. That scores well on efficient movement of goods, but it scores a little bit lower in some of the other categories. Similarly, focusing in active transportation, investing in sidewalks, trails, that would score well in some areas and lower in other areas. And then based on all that evaluation, and as we get into the individual projects, it starts to become a bit more clear. We take a combined approach where we take the best elements of those scenarios and look at those into forming the recommendations of the TMP. Okay, so as we mentioned at the beginning, please, as we go along, if you have any questions, you can type them in real time or just follow along and we can hold questions till the end. All of that material so far was sort of setting the stage for the recommendations, and now we can get into the actual recommendations of the TMP. So this slide is sort of an overview slide. It gives us a broad description of what's being recommended, and then the subsequent slides get into the details. So, and as I mentioned before, it's a 25-year plan. We're looking out to 2045, and the four categories of recommendations are roads, cycling, pedestrians, and call them policies or policies and programs that we recommend for Meaford. So under roads, corridor upgrades, traffic calming measures, traffic operations, speed limit changes, and a new road classification system. I'll come back to that and define what that means. Under cycling, working with the Grey County cycling plan and building on those. We have some additional signed routes for cycling and some recommendations on policies such as bicycle parking. Pedestrians, priority sidewalks, new crossings along Sykes Street, and some upgrades of older sidewalks. And then we have quite a few policies. We'll get into them individually in slides 13 to 16 here, but policies about safety, road operation, and other policies like parking, accessible parking, and so on. Okay, so those are the broad recommendations. I think it's worthwhile pointing out that maybe here that the TMP has found issues, and we've got recommendations. Not all of these recommendations are expensive, but there's quite a few good things in here for the municipality, and we'll explain what those are. So starting off with rural roads. So through our review and problem assessment, we came up with these preliminary recommendations for rural roads. I should mention that we are gathering feedback on these, and so we'd like to hear your thoughts as well, and we're in the process of gathering feedback. So I guess a couple of, I'll actually go through these are important. So color-coded number 1 or number-coded number 1, side road 8 and concession road 2, corridor paving and upgrading, corridor upgrade and paving. Doing that, we're actually looking at a continuous paved loop in northern Meaford, so it'd be a paved route along the alignment you see here. Number 2, side road 22 and concession road 6. That's kind of that is a rural intersection, but it was identified for some safety improvements that are needed. Basically, maintenance type of improvements there. Number 3 is the proposed east-west connection. And so what this is it's a longer term strategy because there's some potential significant cost implications to these recommendations, but it does work towards that objective of providing better east-west access across the southern parts of Meaford. So you can see the alignment that was selected for those upgrades. In general, rural roads, we're recommending, we've heard a lot about speeding concerns on some rural roads. And so there's a recommendation for reviewing speed limits, and we've developed some specific policies and best practices to follow to adjust speed limits over time. And then another kind of key point is a collector network for the rural roads. These would be roads that are identified as being busier and that could be upgraded or would be upgraded over time to support agricultural and commercial vehicles. And you can see the recommendations there. So Lakeshore Drive, like an example of why we came up with these recommendations, Concession Road 10, just on the southeast corner of Owen Sound, that road is already well used by trucks as for access to Grey Road 18. And since it's well used by trucks, it provides access to that important, there's a kind of industrial area in the southern parts of Owen Sound. And so this recommendation is formalizing that as a collector road so that it could be identified as needing to support commercial vehicle movements. And the Gerald Short Parkway as a east-west connector providing access to Grey Road 18, it was identified that trucks are currently going through Walters Falls, or they have difficulty going through Walters Falls, even though those are county roads. And so one of the objectives was to provide alternatives that may be working better for trucks over time. Okay, so moving on to the urban roads, recommendations for urban Meaford. So again, going through the numbered list here. So for downtown Meaford, we looked at some of the intersections and how they operate and identified a need for a separate traffic study of the downtown. This would be studied separately between Edwin Street and Bayfield Street. So that's a future study for the municipality to undertake. Miller Street, we heard quite a bit about Miller Street from safety from residents along the street, and we looked at different alternatives for that street. The current recommendation is to convert Miller Street to a cul-de-sac, converting it to a cul-de-sac so that it does not provide a through movement function. And by doing that, it would really focus the street just to be a residential street serving the residents living on that street. That would, of course, be subject to some future engineering as to how that would look, but potentially we saw the cul-de-sac as being on the west end near Pearson Street. And there could be a cycling connection could be maintained through that intersection. Going down the list, Pearson Street and Ridge Road. Ridge Road was identified as another corridor traffic study. There's some awkward intersection geometry at the Pearson Street intersection, the way that intersection is laid out. There's developments along Ridge Road. And there's a potential need to look at traffic control up at Highway 26 and Ridge Road. So we've identified that as further study, potentially needing new pedestrian and cycling facilities. This will come up again in some later slides. Number 11 is the Sykes and St. Vincent intersection, south part of urban Meaford. Very busy intersection. It's a unusual configuration with a skew angle there, and it's actually a 5-legged intersection. Looking at it from a TMP level, a strategic level, we didn't see any strategic alternatives. So the recommendation there is to work with Grey County to improve the safety and traffic operations at that intersection. It's a county intersection. Number 12, up at the Sykes Street and Ford Avenue. Again, this is a intersection configuration that must date back many years to the way the road network was laid out in the past. With the way that is laid out, wouldn't meet current standards, but it's a legacy of the past. Tricky issue to deal with because we recognize that closing the access to Ford Avenue would perhaps limit access to that neighborhood, but it's also a constraint and safety concern at the intersection, how it operates. So we were looking at potentially implementing some turning restrictions at that intersection. Number 13 is a parking study for Meaford, focusing on the downtown, but because what we heard is that there are residents moving into the downtown, occupying some of the upper floors of the retail along Sykes Street, and that there's some parking shortages for those new or existing residents and businesses in the area. So a parking study to look at the parking supply and constraints in the downtown. And it would also look at the bylaws across Meaford. Two locations identified for traffic calming. One was Aiken Street for access to the Memorial Park, and the other was Grandview Drive. Now these would be, we'll come back to what the traffic calming looks like, but those are corridors that are identified for that. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, we developed a recommended road classification system for Meaford. Now the road classification system, it can be useful to the municipality because it helps define priorities for planning, priorities for maintenance. It helps define the types of traffic that are encouraged or not encouraged to use those roads. An important consideration is the use of Meaford roads for goods movement for trucks. And so generally trucks are encouraged to use the county road network, but that doesn't necessarily bring trucks where they need to be, and you get concerns with trucks using shortcutting on Meaford roads. Of course, trucks that have local destinations, like if farms or businesses along Meaford roads are of course welcome and able to use the Meaford roads, but for trucks that are through, we want to encourage them to use designated roads. So road classification feeds into that. So what we developed was, and I apologize for the small text here, we developed a proposed collector network for Meaford, and it's in this shaded pink. And you can see that the proposed collector network includes some of those roads I mentioned earlier, Concession Road 10, it includes the Parkway. And in urban Meaford, we developed a collector road network, including Ridge Road and St. Vincent Street. And I believe that's the south end of Bayfield Street. Okay, so that's the road classification collector network. Moving along, on the cycling network side, we did a review of the cycling network in Meaford. The county has done a good job with its cycling and trails master plan, so really we're looking to build on that. The plan that we're proposing, as I mentioned, it is a longer term plan, but there are some objectives we identified. One of the objectives was to have a selection of paved and unpaved routes for cyclists for in rural and urban Meaford. Well, I guess urban Meaford would mostly be paved, but in rural Meaford, a selection of paved and unpaved routes. And so the blue dotted line would be the recommendations for cycling, designated cycling network within Meaford. And the objective would be that there could be attractive cycling facilities providing access pretty much throughout Meaford and building on the plan, the Grey County plan. In urban Meaford cycling network, we identified some potential linkages, including Ridge Road and the Miller Street link shown here as some improvements to the already existing designated cycling facilities from the previous plans. Okay, looking at the pedestrian sidewalk network. So as everyone is familiar, a lot of roads in Meaford don't have sidewalks. One of the policies may be that over time, roads in general should have sidewalks in Meaford because they offer safe pedestrian refuge and are generally desirable, but investing in sidewalks across Meaford would be an enormous expense. So some effort was undertaken to identify priority sidewalks. Again, so I just mentioned that other roads would also be have sidewalks as an objective, but we've identified with the green lines here where we think the priorities are because of busy traffic or providing access to an important area or neighborhood. So sidewalks extending along Aiken Avenue to the Memorial Park, some connections on the southwest side of Meaford to provide sidewalk access to the neighborhood, along the collector roads identified before, such as Ridge Road and Sykes Street. The other kind of great recommendation is for pedestrian crossovers. So pedestrian crossovers, if you're not familiar, they're typically signed and they can have the flashing beacons on the signs, and they provide a safe, improved way for pedestrians to cross. And we really identified that Sykes Street is in need of these. So we've identified 6 locations for pedestrian crossovers. Not all of these would be implemented in the very short term, but the municipality would be looking to implement these over time. And the locations that we identified are shown on the map here as these red circles. So these would be locations of these pedestrian crossovers. And just mention that this is a great example of infrastructure that doesn't necessarily cost a lot of money. They're quite cost effective and really can provide an enhancement to the to the look and feel of Meaford, making it safer to cross the street and for people. Okay, so there's several more slides of recommendations. I'll try not to go through them in quite as much detail as the previous one. Of course, everyone is welcome to look at the slides and provide feedback, ask questions, specific or general. All questions and feedback are welcome. This slide is about traffic calming. So municipal staff sometimes get requests from the public or concerns about speeding on roads and requests for traffic calming. Now, traffic calming can be expensive, especially if you get into things like, it can be expensive and it can be intrusive to drivers when you get into things like speed humps, roundabouts, horizontal deflections of curbs like curb bulb outs. And so what the TMP is recommending is that Meaford adopt a 2-stage approach to traffic calming. Typically when concerns come in from the public or complaints or requests for traffic calming, staff would do an assessment as to looking at the flow of traffic and the speed of traffic and determining if traffic calming is needed. If it is needed, to start with so-called soft traffic calming measures. So that would be things like signage, portable or temporary signage, such as portable radar message boards, narrowing lanes, potentially these speed bollards. So soft calming measures, these are typically low cost and often temporary. And evaluating if those help or how severe the problem is, only then proceeding to physical measures, which would require further study and design, such as those items that I mentioned. So that's traffic calming. Looking into other policies and recommendations, a road safety policy and program. So safety is a priority, of course, in managing and planning the network. So the recommendation here is really just for the municipality to review collision data, collect it regularly, and review it. Look for problem locations, locations that have excessive numbers of collisions, and then on a case-by-case basis, reporting those findings to council, determining what the next steps are. It's important that resources are limited. The municipality can't necessarily address every problem location or every location where there are collisions, but by looking at the data, perhaps identifying priorities and the need for capital budget to look into addressing safety improvements over time, and also coordinating with OPP. Traffic calming we sort of covered. Community safety zones are another policy area. Community safety zones typically have lower speed limits. One of the challenges that the municipality faces is enforcing those. So the police typically don't have enough resources to stringently enforce the community safety zones. So one of the items that we identified was consider partnerships with the county or others into the automated speed enforcement, just as a way to improve the compliance of community safety zones. In terms of other policies, speed limits. So one of the recommendations is to consider and do some further investigation as to the desirability of a 40-kilometer-an-hour default urban speed limit, and to undertake speed limit reviews on an individual basis where identified by through staff and public concerns, kind of tied to the traffic calming warrant threshold that was identified. Stop signs, following industry practices to determine if they're warranted. One-way streets. So one-way streets, there was some consideration to address some issues in the downtown. We're not recommending any one-way streets at the current time. The policy is just that that municipality would only consider those through a detailed, comprehensive study. And parking and accessible parking, recommendation to follow AODA guidelines, and as I mentioned before, undertake the parking study of the downtown. Policies for sidewalks. Over time, sidewalks should be provided on at least one side of all local roads. Cycling, we covered the cycling plan, but also two policies. One is to recommend residential and commercial developments provide bicycle parking. So future developments should provide bicycle parking. And the other is that on those cycling routes that we identified previously, that there should be paved shoulders on roads with greater than 700 vehicles per day. Policies about rural roads and bridges. So the municipality is planning to undertake a more detailed study to review existing road surfaces and determine surface types. So different surface treatment options that are available, and looking for ways to better manage the surface treatment program. Bridge rehabilitation and replacement using industry best practices and criteria such as traffic volumes, detour distance, and structural deficiencies. So basically looking at reviewing the bridge rehabilitation and maintenance program. One of the recommendations of the TMP on heavy trucks is to, now that we have a recommended collector road network, for the municipality to look forward and consider restricting heavy vehicles from local streets. So that would of course exclude trucks that are destined to a local destination, and that those could be directed or encouraged to use the collector road network in county roads and Highway 26. Okay, so that was a bit of a long presentation, so thanks for your time. This last slide just tells us what we would like from you, the public. So we would like everyone to take the survey. So there's a survey posted online. Would like you to provide your feedback. That's probably the best way to provide your feedback, because we have the recommendations of these slides and ask for your feedback on them one by one. Of course, you're welcome to reach out to the project team, Tori and myself, if appropriate and if needed. And in terms of where we're going from here, this just kind of covers it. We're going to proceed from this PIC to reviewing your feedback and updating the recommendations and preparing the draft plan for council review and public review. Okay, so I'm going to exit the slides and turn on my camera. Well, I do see someone else has their camera on. Dawn C, so just so you know, your camera is on. If you want to, you can turn that off. So Zach, did we have any questions?
Yeah, quite a few questions here. First, let's start with Laura Lee Jones's question here. Cyclists, or just more of a comment really, regarding cycling routes. Cyclists typically prefer paved roads over gravel roads, was a comment. Did you want to talk a bit about our rationale for kind of, we're going for kind of a continuous paved section, but we recognize that there is need for kind of an unpaved section as well.
Sure. I mean, yeah, as you said, Zach, we've developed, I mean, we are trying to look at the needs of and opportunities, because recognizing that cycling is actually a rapidly growing tourism industry. Touring cyclists are a growth area of the economy, and Meaford has great roads for cycling. Today, there's no paved access for cyclists to get to the northern parts of Meaford, so that was kind of a gap that we identified and thought could be addressed through the paved loop, the paved loop serves more functions than just cyclists, but the cycling network could take advantage of that. Yeah, to give that mix of paved and unpaved options in the rural parts, supporting the economy. And then in the urban parts, there's also for supporting touring recreational cyclists, but the potential for cycling infrastructure, signage routes that increase driver awareness, help with safety, potentially bicycle facilities on some of these roads, because they can improve safety as well.
So Scott, you mentioned the paved loop and how we are, we're calling it a cycling route, but we're also calling it a collector road. So Bill Abbott's had a comment regarding that. How do we reconcile, kind of directing more traffic towards a cycling route? How do the two things coexist in this plan?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, one of the things we talked about and I mentioned was that busier roads that are cycling routes would, over time, if they meet that threshold, be candidates for paved shoulders. So basically, you get paved cycling routes, and then if traffic reaches that threshold of 700 vehicles per day, then it would become a candidate or recommended to have paved shoulders. So that partially addresses that concern, I would say, but also recognizing that yes, I mean, some cyclists would prefer to be on less busy roads, and that's certainly true. And then hopefully the plan provides that balance.
Yeah, I guess just to add to that, part of the idea is, though we are calling that second concession road north a cycling route, that's intended to be paved. There is of course I believe it's the Tom Thompson Trail on the unpaved section that
I believe that's
provide a lower traffic alternative there.
I believe this is the Tom Thompson Trail here as well.
Yeah, it's the yellow lines. Yeah, so north south there as well.
Right.
Okay, so on that topic, so Bill Abbott has been asking quite a bit of different things here, mostly related to this cycling. He wants to know about, you mentioned paved shoulders and you mentioned the thresholds in the Ontario traffic manual. Is there going to be a paved shoulder policy in this document? How are we going to address that?
Well, so far, I think we said that the paved shoulders, correct me if I'm wrong, Zach, would be for those roads that are cycling routes and over 700 AADT.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that sound like that to me seems like something that we would like to include in the final TMP. Maybe just a bit of an omission during this round of consultation, I think, from our policy boards. But I will note that the Ontario Traffic Manual cycling book is being updated, and I believe that there's going to be new warrants, new thresholds for paved shoulders in rural roads. So that may be something we have to be a little bit flexible on and say, follow the guidelines kind of thing as they're updated. But I think that would be something to consider.
Yep, that sounds good. And of course, if there's comments on the individual roads selected, we didn't go through them in too much detail for this presentation. This is through our review consultation with staff, and we think it's a good start, but certainly there's opportunity for feedback on the routes selected. One of the challenges that we were looking at, Zach, you can recall, is if we wanted to provide a paved access to the north part of Meaford, there's no paved road that's continuous across Highway 26. So we did identify a short section of Highway 26 that may need to be used by cyclists to provide access between the north and the south part in this part of of Meaford.
Yeah, and there's been some comments about the Highway 26 segments. They're obviously the highest traffic. It's the highest traffic road in the city outside of the urban area, I believe. So that is going to be an issue. Yeah, as you see Tom Hakala right now. The idea, because it's a provincial road, Meaford, can't unilaterally mandate paved shoulders. I think the hope would be that at some point there'd be some collaboration between Ontario and Meaford on that. And
right.
Scott, maybe you can speak more to that.
Right. So yeah, it is a provincial facility, so it would need coordination with the province and their buy-in that this is an important linkage, and then they could consider paving shoulders perhaps for this segment only, or perhaps over time they could expand that. Of course, recognizing the province does have their own cycling plan, which uses Grey Road 18 and provides access to Meaford, but does not provide that access connection that we're looking for. Another consideration I just raised because we heard it during our some previous meetings was, this side road 10 has a pretty steep grade on it, and therefore paving that connection could be some time out depending on funding availability because of the steep grade. But nonetheless, it was identified as a potential connection, both from a cycling perspective, and it was shown on the east-west connector road classification map. So anything else, Zach, on that topic?
Yeah, I just wanted to note, looking at this map in more detail here, that those sections of Highway 26, especially between our paved loop and then Grey Road, I think it's 18, is within the escarpment area. So that could be an additional challenge that we have to think about going forward. But hopefully we can come up with something. So let's see what else we have here. Going back to the very beginning, let's see. Well, do you want to talk about, where was it? Do you want to talk about Miller Street, Scott? We had a comment.
Sure.
Similar to what we heard before about it being a pretty popular cut through to avoid the downtown traffic.
Right. I mean, I guess for the purposes, one of the things we probably could have done was prepared the aerial image. For the purposes of the presentation right now, I mean, this map is probably sufficient. So right from the get-go of the TMP, we heard both from staff and we heard from the public in our first consultation that safety along this street is really a concern. It's narrow, there's no traffic protection, so there's no guardrails right adjacent to the river as it gets close to Edwin Street. And it's narrow, and we also heard that some traffic is traveling much too fast on this road. And so that was kind of the reason we looked at it. Different alternatives we looked at. Well, there's even another concern up at the Sykes Street intersection of potential sightline concerns for crossing the because of the bridge over the river. So we looking at the different alternatives. It was actually an idea that came, I believe, maybe Tori can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it did originally come from the public, was a commentary that this road could be cul-de-saced, that the intent of that this road may be being used as a through route for traffic from the west, but that it is a residential street and it's currently not designed as a collector road to accommodate that through road function. Generally, we agree, and part of that is that in order to make this road a through road function with sidewalk and traffic barriers, the municipality would be looking at a very high cost because of how narrow the road is and because of the engineering constraints near that intersection of Edwin Street. And that type of improvement, like upgrading this road may not be affordable, but it also may not be desirable for the municipality and for the because it is a Meaford road. And so our thought process is that the cul-de-sac idea seems to have merit. It would formalize the road as a local road, only serving residents along that road, and it would no longer really be a route for through traffic coming from the west part of Meaford into urban Meaford. The through traffic would be encouraged to stay on Grey Road 12 to Pearson and Nelson and access Sykes Street via that option. So that was some of the thought processes that went into that. Of course, we're gathering the feedback and would like to hear what others have to say on that.
Yeah, and just to add quickly, because Grey Road 12 to Nelson Street is a county road, that would be the preferred road for through traffic. And so right now we definitely see that some through traffic cuts down Miller Street Hill, and unfortunately with the road right of way we have in that location, that would never be a possibility to upgrade it to be safe for high traffic volumes. And so we did work with Scott and his team to figure out if there were other ways that road could change to make it more of a local road. And some of the ideas were, making it a one-way. The cul-de-sac was a suggestion by a resident through the transportation master plan. But if you need to get to other local roads in the Miller Street area, off of Nelson Street, there's other local roads that could be traveled to allow for that connection. So we feel like it will really allow for people to utilize Nelson Street as that connector to get the downtown, whereas there's still access in multiple locations to the locals roads in that area.
Okay. Thanks, Tori. Let's see. Let's do another question here. So this is actually part one of the Miller Street question, but it relates to how are we going to do traffic calming on some of the rural roads? So traffic calming, I think maybe kind of evokes a sense of more urban activity, but so how are we going to apply it to slowing down traffic near some of those, there's a couple pockets of population areas that are on rural roads.
Right. So that's a good question. I mean, from my perspective, the policy that we had developed would generally apply, and that is that when concerns and requests come to municipal staff, they would review it, assess whether or not action is warranted and justified by looking at the speed of traffic and the volume of traffic on the road. And if justified, follow a similar process of soft calming and then considering other interventions. Now for rural roads, the toolkit is a little bit more limited, like the types of tools that could be done or that could be used, like placing of signs and so on might be more constrained, but generally that process would be followed. And then I would also just point that the other recommendation is that speed limits would be reviewed on an individual basis, following best practice guidelines. And so tied to the traffic calming and safety program, speed limits could be looked at by staff using the provincial guidelines and considering reduction in speed limits.
Yeah, I'd like to add to this hasn't been shared publicly yet either. It's kind of too detailed for that, but part of our approach on traffic calming is to really provide kind of a transparent process that everyone can kind of follow. And in the rural areas, recognizing that some of these streets, volumes are quite low, but even if you have 100 speeding cars a day, that's still a significant hazard. So we look mostly at speed limits on the rural areas rather than relying on some sort of volume that may never materialize.
Right. Thanks. Yeah.
I saw Ross Kentner put his hand up. Ross, we're going to do the questions in the chat if that's okay. So if you can type a question in there, that'd be ideal. Okay. So what else do we have? We have some support for the Miller Street cul-de-sac from Jessica. What else are we? Do you want to talk about, okay, so we talk about parking. I see Brian Wood says parking should be reviewed for all waterfront parks since this attracts tourists. This would apply to smaller locations like Christie Beach as well as larger Meaford locations. Might it also apply to Leith and in rural waterfronts as well? So,
okay, that's a good comment. I mean, we can take that back and talk about that with the project team. I think that's a great comment. That and please, when you fill out your comment sheet, if you can mention specifics like locations where you think there's a parking shortage that are not being that was not considered or that you didn't see mentioned today, then would like to hear that in your feedback, in your comments. So
yeah, and I would say during our first round of consultation, we asked about parking, and I don't recall we got a lot of comments as we saw earlier, over 300 responses to that survey. I can't offhand recall any complaints about a parking shortage kind of thing. I mean, you know, there always kind of feels like there is, but so it hasn't made it into the plan at this point, but it's definitely something that can be looked at.
Yeah.
Okay. Got all out of order here. Sorry, just bear with me for a second here as I try and find something new to discuss. Okay, so I guess another question regarding Side Road 10. Okay, well, Scott, you actually did kind of mention this a little bit. Maybe we can reiterate it. Side Road 10, Bill Guest was just pointing out the major vertical curves on that road and how we are going to deal with that, and how is it going to be possible to design something where agricultural vehicles can use the road still, as well as trucks, something, you know, along those regards. It's, you know, that's a kind of concern we have.
Yeah, it's a valid question. I mean, we're trying to develop a plan that both targets, you know, we are looking fairly far out, 25 years in the future. So we don't want to be too constrained where there could be a potential cost of an improvement if we feel it's valuable. And one of the comments we did hear quite strongly was that, well, both from during the public feedback round 1 and through our consultation with the agricultural community and industry, was that there is a need for east and east-west connection. But yes, totally recognize it, or we do recognize that gradient would be a huge barrier to actually making a proper collector road that meets appropriate design standards, and that type of investment would be too high for for Meaford to bear on its own to actually to meet that road. So what we've identified is that it could be upgraded as a cycling route or designated as a cycling route and put into a long-term plan. But also when you have roads like this and that meet an identified need in a transportation master plan, it does potentially open up other funding opportunities such as provincial funding. And so there's value in putting those types of desires into a transportation master plan. So I'm not sure if I fully addressed that question, but we do see the value of it from a cycling perspective and from a connectivity perspective for goods movement.
Okay, thanks, Scott. I'm kind of running out of questions, but I have a couple comments I'll just add in here.
Okay.
Now, if I can find them again. One comment was that we need to make sure we have safe cycling and pedestrian routes to the new school. So, I mean, you're on cycling there. Maybe
that's a great comment. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, yeah. So the new school is at the southeast corner there of St. Vincent and Sykes. Yeah, right there.
Yeah. So that's a good comment. And so on the county cycling plan, St. Vincent Street is identified as a cycling route. And so it does fall on that on that plan. For our plan, we haven't identified other roads in this immediate area to be added to the county cycling plan. Just that it would remain as St. Vincent Street for the primary cycling route. I believe Syke Street itself. I don't know if there's too much opportunity for converting that into a cycling route. So I think it has been captured in the cycling plan, the new school, but.
To interrupt, I think part of, and we can make sure this makes it into the TMP as well, but part of that other project that was identified for that intersection of St. Vincent and Sykes, kind of, we're looking to work with the county to improve safety, for all road users there and improve operations for all road users there. So if there is, if they're going to have a cycling route that goes all the way along St. Vincent there, making sure that it's safe to cross Sykes is going to be very important as well.
Oh, that's great addition. Thanks, Zach. Yeah.
And if you want to just flip to the sidewalks, maybe quickly.
Sure.
I think we can show, one of our priority corridors there is extending the sidewalk on both sides of Sykes to make sure we reach that school, and also providing a crossing opportunity at Coleman Street there, which could help some people get around that area and towards the school.
Okay.
Okay, I've got a new question here from Ross Kentner. Have you looked into the challenges that agricultural traffic has in the Bognor area with the steep hills, especially in the winter?
So I would say that we have looked at it, and it did form part of these recommendations. Sorry, I'm going to go to the rural roads plan. And I would say that we're continuing to engage Stefan, one of the representatives of the agricultural community, and we're looking at further at the Bognor area and the needs as part of the consultation that we're doing right now. So if you have any specific comments about this area, would like to hear them. This was the plan that we developed so far, and we're interested in gathering further comments on the Bognor area specific needs.
Yeah, we'd definitely really like to hear input on that specifically.
Right. So please, please do submit your comment form, and we like to hear specific comments about your feedback there.
Can you flip to cycling real quick? I'm just going to quickly address Ross's follow-up question here.
Sure.
So Ross, you just noted that you don't see the Georgian Trail, but it's there in kind of like a light purple, maybe a little bit light. If you go to the urban part, Scott.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
The Georgian Trail there connects kind of downtown Meaford over to Thornbury. Hopefully that addresses. So I just want to, for the record, Ross says there should be provision for people to walk and cycle as much shoreline in urban Meaford as possible. So that's something that I think is looked at as part of the waterfront master plan that Meaford has done. I know there's some good stuff there, but as far as from a transportation perspective, we're highlighting corridors kind of. We haven't highlighted anything specific along that waterfront, although there is a couple segments where there's little gaps in the sidewalks. Okay, so Jessica followed up on Miller Street. I don't think we're going to have a good answer for this, but do we have a timeline in mind for Miller Street changes?
No, I think the answer is no right now, but basically once the TMP is accepted, then generally what that means is that the need and justification for a project is like through the EA process, through the provincial process. Once a project is identified in a TMP and the TMP is finalized, then the municipality is permitted to proceed with phase 3 and 4 of the EA, which is design solutions and implementation. So basically the municipality would have the flexibility to start looking at implementing that within the next 10 years and timing to be determined. Tori, please jump in if you have any thoughts on timing that I didn't cover.
Yeah, I mean, some of these projects, and I think the Miller Street one will definitely be further up in the project timing, but it depends on a lot of different items. Whereas some of the other ones, which are clearly further out, including that 10th side road enhancement, or some of the larger sidewalk or road improvements, but some of the more specific projects that address concerns that we have seen on an ongoing basis will be a priority sooner throughout the planning implementation.
I think part of our next steps in this TMP process is going to try to really figure out a little bit more detailed timing and how we're going to make all these recommendations work within Meaford's capital budget. Really, at a high level, because it's a TMP, but we have to make sure it's feasible and achievable. Question about pedestrian crossovers, but how will they impact traffic on Sykes Street? So Sykes obviously is a very busy road. If we're proposing a bunch of crossovers, how is that going to impact the travel times, bottlenecks, that kind of thing?
That's a good question. So I would say that generally that would, I mean, we haven't done a specific traffic analysis of these locations, but generally the pedestrian crossovers don't have a significant delay to traffic because just the occurrence, the number of times per hour that they get cycled is relatively low. And as you know, there's already gaps in traffic provided by the signals along Sykes Street. And so it's not too different than traffic signals in terms of the short-term delay experienced by drivers needing to slow down and stop for a pedestrian crossing. And the delay is actually quite limited because once the pedestrians are clear of the roadway, drivers are permitted to continue through. So
yeah, it's kind of the trade-off. The alternative is, full traffic light where you have to wait whether there's pedestrians or not a lot of the time, right? So I found in my experience walking around cities and even driving around cities, you see a pedestrian, takes them 10 seconds, 20 seconds at most to cross the street, and then you're on your way again quite quickly. Okay, hopefully that answered that question. Let's talk about Pearson Street and Ridge Road. So the question from Shirley is, if this corridor is becoming part of our collector network, how would traffic calming and speeding be controlled? Would there be additional stop signs or reduced speed limits? So what's the overall vision for this corridor, Scott, if you know? And I can jump in as well if we need to.
Sure. Well, I mean, please jump in. I would say that, through the TMP, we've identified that this is an important road for northwest part of urban Meaford. It provides that important connection to Highway 26. There's developments along the road, and it provides that access to the hospital area, to the downtown for residents. And so because we've identified it as an important road, today there's no sidewalks. It's quite a narrow road. And so it was identified both for sidewalks and for further study through the traffic operations analysis to look at those issues like traffic control. For example, the intersection of Pearson and Nelson Street, where it's quite an awkward geometry that needs to be looked at in more detail through traffic study, and potential traffic control up at Sykes and Ridge Road needs to be investigated further.
And I think it's important to point out, we're asking this corridor to do a lot of different things. So we're calling it a collector road. We're acknowledging that there's going to be a lot of development. There's the development at the golf course there. There's more homes going in north of there, and then even north of Highway 26. There's proposed developments that could feed into this corridor potentially. But we also recognize that we've heard a lot in the first round of consultation about unsafe speeds and lack of pedestrian and cycling facilities, most notably pedestrian. So, we haven't really looked at it in terms of traffic calming per se, but it's one of our key priority. I would say it's near the top in terms of priority sidewalk corridors. So we're hoping to address that issue that way. It's part of the cycling network that we've identified. So as traffic volumes increase, there's going to become a need for potentially bike lanes or something, maybe a multi-use trail instead of a sidewalk that can combine both. We're asking it to do a lot, and it's going to be a bit of a challenging project, but given that, like Scott mentioned, there are some constraints with the width of the road and things like that. But sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, so yeah, there's the TMP does require or does recommend some further investigations of that road, but basically we have identified it for sidewalks and some form of a cycling facility.
Okay, can we go? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Tori.
Sorry, I just wanted to add, part of the reason too why it's been identified as a collector road is because of the existing traffic counts that exist on that road. And so the intention, along with St. Vincent, is to actually allow for those increased pedestrian and bike facilities so that those roads can continue to be as busy as they are. But then pedestrian and active transportation can have a safe way of also traveling on the road. And so it's not necessarily that we will be forcing more people there, because in reality, Highway 26 and Sykes Street, provide an enhanced traveling route, but it just allows for that road with already heightened traffic counts on it to have other facilities to allow for active transportation to occur safely with that traffic that we're currently seeing.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, are we all good on that one, do you think, Scott?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears back to Miller Street, just to kind of get back to that concern about traffic being forced onto Nelson and into the intersection at Sykes, and then to Trowbridge through to across the bridge there. How do we propose to manage extra traffic? Do we think there's going to be quite a bit of volume shifted over there? Is that something that needs further study? How can we deal with it if it does kind of cause a bottleneck there at Nelson and Sykes?
Okay, so I would say that's a good comment. Generally, the objective would be for that more traffic to use the Miller Street, Pearson, and the Nelson Avenue and Sykes intersection as more of a desirable connection than Miller Street to Edmund Street. As mentioned earlier, the plan is that if that were to be cul-de-sac, there would still be connectivity to the neighborhood through the other roads that are provided in the local area. In terms of the traffic impacts of that connection, yes, I think that's a good point. Perhaps it could be included in the recommendations of the downtown study to assess any diversion of traffic from the intersection of Miller and Edwin to the intersection of Nelson and Sykes.
Yeah.
And just to add, right now, like Nelson Street and Sykes Street does have a light. And so that's the intention of a lighted intersection, is to provide flow of traffic when you're seeing high traffic volumes in both directions. Currently, Sykes Street sees significantly higher volumes than we see on Nelson Street. So if there is added volume on Nelson Street, that light will be able to handle it. Whereas diverting traffic currently to Edwin Street, where it's just a two-way stop and actually an awkward intersection with Edwin on the east side connecting into Margaret Street, that intersection currently causes more of an issue with traffic concerns and safety. And so by cul-de-sacing Miller, we may actually potentially have safer travel into the downtown from the west, because we won't have people rerouting to that Edwin Street intersection that's more that doesn't have the stoplight that you would get to at Nelson Street.
So along those lines, Tori, how do you see, so the comment actually specifically mentioned Trowbridge and Syke. So do you see drivers going Pearson, Nelson, and then, either Cook or, I can't remember the name of the street beside it, but then kind of detouring to Trowbridge, then to the lights there to get to Syke? And how would that be?
I think so, but there's also a light at Trowbridge. I mean, there is different opportunities for people to access Syke Street at lighted intersections, and that provides them a safer opportunity to turn left or right. Whereas I know at some intersections, such as Edwin Street, where most of that Miller Street traffic is headed, it's an intersection that comes halfway through a hill, and it can take a while for someone to make the left-hand turn, and even a right-hand. So by directing them to a lighted intersection, it would definitely provide further safety within our road network.
Okay.
I wanted to jump back to Pearson and Ridge Road. I had forgotten to mention this when we were discussing, and Shirley brings up some point here as well, noting that it's a main ambulance route from the hospital to Highway 26. So and she had also, or maybe, yeah, she had mentioned stop signs along the road as well. I wanted to point out that stop signs are generally not a good solution to speeding traffic, and we talk about this in our traffic calming section. You guys haven't seen it yet, but it'll be in the TMP. And the reason we're developing the traffic calming is to come up with better solutions. And one of our kind of guiding principles on that thing is on that policy as well is to not impede emergency services vehicles. So knowing that is a main route that ambulances take would definitely come into consideration in the kind of different treatments that you might put into, we're not saying we're going to put traffic calming on that road anyways at this point, but it's something that's definitely always considered. Okay. Anything else there, Scott?
No, just looking. I saw another question popped up under just recently.
Yeah, I've got a new one here. Talking about St. Vincent.
Yeah.
St. Vincent Street. Ross noted that so residents have identified that parking should be restricted to one side on St. Vincent Street. That's something that I mean. So he notes that could be a safety issue. I think Scott, jump in here if you'd like, but I think that's something that the TMP doesn't look at in that detail, but we can definitely take this comment.
Yeah, I would say please put in specific comments like that, and we'll have a look at them as we're reviewing the feedback from the public. Yeah,
typically those kind of things they have a way of making their way to the right people if you submit them. So okay. Was there a discussion of a stoplight at Boucher and Sykes? I think is it Boucher? Boucher?
No, but that was identified as. Oh, the pronunciation. Yeah, I wouldn't know how to pronounce that either. Yeah. No, but that was identified as falling within the limits of our downtown traffic study, so it would be looked at that time.
Yeah, that is definitely something that could come out of that traffic study. I think one of the issues that Scott and I we've discussed is that there are a lot of connections to Syke Street there. So on their own, they're probably not, they wouldn't have the traffic volumes alone to warrant traffic signals, but there might be something that can be, there might be a solution that comes out of that traffic study that can kind of figure out how to deal with that.
Okay, so I think we're getting close to the end of comments.
I think I've hit everything here. If I've missed you, please feel free to type it again just to get my attention. I think we've talked on everything here. If you have rebuttals, feel free to throw those in.
Yeah.
But hopefully.
Okay, so yeah, I think we're getting close to being able to wrap it up tonight. So
yeah, hopefully we've addressed. Sorry to interrupt, Scott. Hopefully we've addressed kind of all these issues sufficiently.
Yeah. All right, so I think what we'll do is we'll just take another moment. So we're on standby here until 8 o'clock. We're here to answer any further questions, but I'd just like to reiterate, thank you all for taking the time to participate. It's a really important part of our TMP is gathering your comments and feedback. We really appreciate your comments provided here tonight. We will note them and record our feedback received in real time tonight through your comments. So appreciate that. And also just to remind you that the best method to get your comments and feedback to us is through the online survey. Those we will look at individually, and we will be tabulating those responses and including those in the documentation of the TMP. So please provide your feedback through that process. And of course, reach out if you would like to talk to us individually. We're open to communications. So, Tori, is there anything you wanted to do to wrap up the presentation? Anything you wanted to add?
I just wanted to thank everyone who came out tonight. It's been wonderful to have this opportunity, especially in the current situation we are, to still be able to meet with all of you and to be able to provide you with an update on this project. When we started this project almost a year ago, there was definitely questions on how we would proceed, and working with the IBI team, we've been happy to actually get a lot of input from the public. And so thank you for this additional input. We'd be, as Scott said, happy to hear additional information that you may have. And we look forward to starting to implement these things over the long term to hopefully continue to improve Meaford's transportation network.
Okay, so with that, again, thanks everyone, and please have a great evening, and we look forward to seeing your comments.
Before so Scott, I think you said we're going to hang out till 8 just in case some more things roll in. Is that right?
Yes, we can stay online.
Okay, well, I just wanted to acknowledge we have had a couple comments since then. Firstly, you were invited to a bike ride in Meaford, so to see if you want to take Bill up on that. I know you do bike up there quite a bit already, right?
I have been, so I am a cyclist, and I have ridden through some Meaford roads. Yes, I went up through Walters Falls, cut across towards Meaford, and then back down to the Flesherton area. So I'm somewhat familiar with the area cycling.
Okay.
So,
sorry.
Yeah.
I just want to acknowledge Shirley's comment here, closing comment here. Noting that we have talked quite a bit about urban issues, but I want to emphasize that, I agree with this comment that we need to focus on the rural area as well. We've put a lot of work into that to try to make sure that we address kind of the whole municipality kind of equally, recognizing how important agriculture is, and the fact that I think it's 55% of Meaford population is outside of that main urban area. So it's an important part of this study for sure.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then I just see, Steve, you had a comment that this is the first presentation that you were not allowed to speak. Thanks for that comment. I mean, as we prepared for this, we were debating the different ways of hosting this event. Because it's an online meeting, there was some thought about having too many people speak and having it become confusing for some people to watch. So we did make the decision to have it as a typed question methodology. We have done that before, the typed question approach. So thanks for that comment. We'll include your comment about the inability to speak in our discussion as we close this PIC, and we'll record that preference. So thank you for that comment.
I think, we're also, we're, what are we, 10 months in now, or 9 months into this pandemic. We're also trying to figure out the best way to do these kind of things, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
So happy for that feedback, yeah.
Yeah.
So we just received another comment here from Marissa. Has there been any consideration for safe cycling to from Memorial Park and the main downtown area and harbor?
Well, thanks, Marissa. I mean, one of the maps we showed did have the traffic calming, and we identified the sidewalks for the Memorial Park Road for connection on to Aiken Street. So
there is
we didn't. Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the county plan identify that as a cycling route?
Yeah, so I guess the cycling route that the county is envisioning is going straight from Grant to St. Vincent, which you can then take into the downtown, the harborfront area.
Right.
The county's showing those as side routes. They're pretty low traffic streets, so that should be relatively safe with signs giving some increased awareness, maybe some paint markings, but that's the consideration. Hoping for a waterfront route, she replies.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not sure they have. Yeah. Well, we'll definitely record that and make sure people know about it.
Yeah, I think part of the problem with that is just there's not a lot of roads in that section that kind of go along the water, like even Grant Avenue. There's houses between the road and water. The only real section that does is where you bend on Aiken Street to Lakeside Avenue, but it is a very rarely traveled road because it really only accesses a couple properties. So with the traffic counts, that's why we hadn't looked at it. And that's why the county plan also, they were looking at, providing that those cycling routes on roads that had both higher traffic counts and access to locations. And so that's kind of why in this that area north of Aiken Street for now, there isn't anything, not to say there never will be, but that's why the focus was on Aiken, Grant, and then down to the harbor on St. Vincent.
Okay. Thanks for that comment.
Yeah.
Should we do a last call kind of thing?
I think so, yeah. Seems like we've addressed most of the topics, and yeah, as mentioned, please provide your forms, and we're about to shut it down for the night. So thanks again, everyone, for participating. Tori, are you comfortable closing down the meeting?
Yeah, it looks like there's just a couple comments in which we'll make sure that we take into consideration.
Okay.
Yeah, just noting that Marissa, when she said cycling, also means walking, and as you noted, we do have a priority sidewalk connection out Grant Avenue to Memorial Park. That's a really important piece. Ross notes the town owns shoreline at the foot of Boucher, so it might be a connection opportunity there. Okay.
Well, thanks everyone again. And if you do have anything else that you think of or want to pass along, our contact information is on the website, and we can we'll take in your comments and incorporate them into the master plan.
All right. Yeah. Thanks everyone. Have a great evening.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Good night.